Okay, everyone. Good morning. My name is Beth Albach. I am the program manager for the Southeast Pennsylvania Apex Accelerator. I want to welcome everyone this morning to our event, CMMC. The proposed rules are out. Now what? This is day 2 of a day 3 event. We have been joined by 3Comply, a company that is partnering with our accelerator currently to bring knowledge regarding new cybersecurity rules for government contracting. Today, we are joined by Jan Himmelreich and Bill Cameron. Both are registered providers with extensive knowledge in assisting small and moderate-sized businesses achieve compliance. They continue to maximize available resources to deliver top performance to these businesses. Again, this is a continuation of yesterday's webinar. You didn't have to be here yesterday in order to follow along today. But we do ask, just housekeeping, please keep yourselves muted. If you have any questions, please utilize the chat. We will either answer them throughout the course of the presentation, or at the end, we will have time for a Q&A. And
there's stuff about Apex, Bill.
Yeah. If you can just advance the slides, sorry. Just about Apex Accelerators again. Today we are co-hosted by Apex Accelerators across Pennsylvania. Who we are is a federally funded program under the U.S. Department of Defense. We provide no-cost assistance to businesses that are looking to branch into the government sector. We are 97 centers nationwide, and again, our centers cover the entirety of the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yep. And next slide. Again, if you're wondering where your service area was, you can take a quick screenshot of this right here. And if you're an out of state, you can find your accelerator by following the www.aptacus.org and utilize that to find your out of state accelerator. In addition to Apex co-hosting this event, we are also joined by Angie Kohler, who is our WEDNet Pennsylvania coordinator. Angie, if you'd like to speak a little bit on your program.
Good morning, everyone. Hello. Some of you may or may not be familiar with WEDNet PA. It's the Workforce and Economic Development Network of Pennsylvania. We bring training to the qualified companies across the Commonwealth through a network of community colleges, state system universities, and other educational institutions. The workforce of tomorrow is changing, and in the years ahead, success will require a more flexible and diverse workplace, which we have seen yesterday, and you'll learn today. Technology will continue to play a greater role. On wednetpa.com, and I'll put the information in the chat. We help companies with some of the cost of training your employees and getting their skill levels up to where today's market is. So thank you. I'll put in my contact information as well.
And again, folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to be turning over controls to Jen and Bill. Thank you both, and away we go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today's area we're talking about, we call it the road to CMMC, and myself and Janet will be doing most of the presentation today. As mentioned yesterday, we are co-owners of 3Comply. We are a compliance advisory service, and we heavily work with companies from the DIB to help make sure that they can navigate some, sometimes very difficult requirements. Janet?
Hi, yeah, Janet Himmelreich. I would, by the way, mention if you I don't think it got mentioned, but if you have a question, please put it in the chat. We will have an end of the presentation. We will have a Q&A period, but if things come up throughout the chat, throughout the presentation, you can put it in the chat. So anyway, I've been working in compliance for many years, so I'm happy to bring that expertise to the small and medium-sized businesses that are trying to struggle their way through understanding the CMMC environment and how to put it in place. So we've been doing that for a few years together, and happy to be here. Thank you.
just a little bit of background about what we do at 3Comply. We're focused basically in 3 different areas: cybersecurity, risk management, and regulatory and privacy. We work with a lot with having to navigate very complex, either contractual or regulatory requirements that are coming down. We are certified through the Cyber AB. We also have a background also in privacy as well. And we've had a host of helping bring big company knowledge to smaller businesses and helping to make sure that they leverage those learnings and those things, the strategies, the best way possible. We are, as of yesterday too, some folks already did this, hopefully that came through. We do have some free resources available to you. This QR code will make sure that it's available also at the end. But if you want to take either a quick screenshot or you want to hit it with your phone, these resources, which we will be going a little bit over these more in detail later on. These things will can help, and they're free resources and they're available to you right now. So one of the things that we're talking about is really about the DFARS, or the rules, and your business. So we try to take a business focused view on this, which is super important, because this isn't just cybersecurity. This is how you do your business, how you function. And just looking at from the DFARS perspective, what are the things, how does these rules affect your business? And so this is it's just, I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but a SWOT diagram. So from the strength, it solidifies your IT risk management. You wind up becoming better positioned for an incident, and overall you lower your risk. On a weakness side, there is investment that's needed. It takes time to implement, and it requires a change of your culture impact. So there will be, anytime you do any kind of thing that's going to affect all of your business, it's going to affect the people within it. It's going to affect business culture. So it's not just something that you can write a check on and sign up for something and it all goes away. That's not how this works. From an opportunities perspective, if you're qualified contractors, are going to be better positioned to win their new contracts. You wind up having reduced org to the potential as well. You can have the potential business volume increase, because there are going to be companies that are not going to do this. And those companies that are willing to do this are going to wind up with that business. So that competition field, we anticipate, is probably going to change significantly over the next 2 or 3 years. From a threats area, non-compliance could trigger False Claims Act. And we've talked about that a little bit yesterday. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. And it is true that nation states are still targeting small businesses. So that means, yeah, there's still a threat that's happening today. And we're going to go over some examples of things that have happened. You want to take this one, Janet?
Yeah, so I want to remind people that DFAR stands for Defense Federal Acquisition Rules Supplement. So those are the rules for anybody with a contract with DFARS, and that 7012 is the one that is been in place since 2017. It came into full effect at the end of December 2017, and that's the one that requires that you use NIST 800-171. And as we discussed, that it's been in effect that long, and really the Defense Department didn't do a great job making sure that people were actually putting it in place, not just saying that they did. And that's how CMMC has come about. It's a validation program, and it's really because of those national security threats. They're not going away. In fact, they're probably getting worse and worse and worse, because not only do they steal and make themselves comfortable inside the critical infrastructure of the US, but they're stealing your intellectual property at the same time. And they really want to get into the military technology. So now they're looking at a way to enforce that is new since 2021. And they are using the False Claims Act. Any of you that have heard about that are probably more aware in healthcare. But the Department of Justice collects, in the billions every year. So now they've expanded it, and it is being used for these cybersecurity requirements.
I'm just going to ask a quick question, and and for the participants to put into the chat. Have you guys in your business today been asked to follow DFAR 7012, or have you actually been asked to read it or been exposed to it? Any comments would be very interested.
Is it in your contract? That's the basic bottom line. Is it in your contract?
We've got some, so far we got 50-50.
I'll look at those if you want to go on to the next slide. Yeah.
Yep. So there's two big things out there, and I like to call it the carrot and the stick. So the carrot is that you're going to be able to, once you put these things in place, these items in place, you're going to be able to continue to sell to the government. You're going to have some reduced business risk. You're going to wind up having some improved rates for cybersecurity insurance. There was somebody that talked about that yesterday that asked that question. You should be able to protect your intellectual property and also protect your brand, because on the flip side, when events happen, it becomes very public. And for example, there's the company SolarWinds. They had some issues, and when that happened, they wound up having to change their name, and they're a huge company. From the stick perspective, so a misleading SPURS score could be a false claim case. There is something that's known as whistleblowing, and there's huge payouts. And what that means is that there's an incentive for people within the organization, if they know that the company is reporting one piece of information and in fact that it's another status within the organization, the government actually rewards that. And you can get a huge payout for that. If a lot of times these go to settlements, and whistleblowers winds up with millions of dollars oftentimes. The fines or the settlement payments can be at least 3 times the size of the contract, and could be larger based upon what it is. And you could be barred from future contracting. And you basically, there's also the potential of surprise audit, and obviously bad press and loss of current contracts. So there's definitely, both things to consider. And when you guys are talking with your own organizations, and internally, it's important to keep these things in mind. Why are we doing all of this? Okay. So we mentioned a little bit about this yesterday, that there definitely are threats that are coming out, where intellectual property, and especially CUI, is currently being stolen. These are some cases that are from the not too recent past. There's been cases, there's been tons of them. If you go and search for it, there's news articles on this on a regular basis about the quantity of things that are being stolen. And one of the things that they do is they try to go to the supplier information and things that might not be, you might like, oh, well, what's the big deal about an order of bolts, right? What they do is they might go and they might take small little innocuous pieces of information, put that together, and then through that are able to take and be able to create a classified picture of what's going on. So think of it sort of like as a mosaic. In some cases, yeah, they might have to steal they stole the actual plans or something like that. But a lot of times it's stealing the smaller information to then assemble a bigger picture. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, about the False Claims Act. And basically, again, this is a Civil War era law, but it is the main enforcement vehicle. And these charges can be brought against companies, but also can be brought against individuals as well. So this is definitely part of that stick perspective. And there is some movements within the Department of Justice to increase the amount of enforcements. So just to give you an idea of what some of the settlement amounts that we had mentioned in some of the previous slides. So the Booz Allen agreed to pay $377.45 million that's million, to settle False Claims Act. And I believe that was also a whistleblower. And then the Aerojet Rocketdyne was 9 million. And again, a whistleblower got a portion of that as well. So these are definitely things that happen out in the environment. So these are also things to take into consideration. Now, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. And when we're looking at this, we call this the requirement burger, and I put the extra fries and Coke inside of this level 3. There's the FARs and the DFARS clauses that are really the meat of the sandwich. The CMMC level 1, level 2, and level 3 are considered sort of like the bun. And the 800, 171, 800, 171A, and 172 and 172A are kind of like the bottom of it. In other words, where does all this stuff come from? And there's an assumption currently that all organizations that they're coming into this, they have these things called NFO controls from Appendix E. We're not going to go through these controls in detail. These are, if you have exposed yourself to some of these documents, these are complicated documents. They're complicated to read. But this is just kind of giving the overall structure about where some of these things are. So we've developed just a kind of like a simplistic view of looking at how does this whole thing work, soup to nuts, and we call it the road to CMMC. And I'm going to introduce a little bit of these different areas here. We have one of the first steps is to establish your spurs. We call it spurs and basics. It's, where you are today. Okay, come as you are. What is the thing? What is your environment today? What does it look like? It provides a starting point. Then there's the boundary and the enclave. It's established what is to be protected. What do you have specifically? And then what are you doing? What are the basic things that you have in place so that you can be able to set up that protective environment? Policies and procedures. This also includes documentation of who, what, where, when. There's procedures. There's also plans that also come into play. There's implementation, which consider the implementation is applying all of the policy and procedures against everything that you have in your environment, and you're assembling evidence. You're trying to say, hey, well, how do I prove that I did that or I have that in place? And there's reports, there's all kinds of things, all kinds of ways, all kinds of types of evidence to be able to do that. There then is a stage, is like a period of time will happen during implementation, and you're able to then go to and do a pre-assessment. So consider the pre-assessment kind of like the ticket to get to your certification. So a pre-assessment is going in, it's actually, tearing back the layers of the onion. Where is the evidence? What do you have? What state is it in? And getting squared away so that when you go for your certification, you have all of those things laid out and everything is super clear. And the certification, if it's done properly, should go relatively smoothly at that point. Or when the C3PAO comes in to examine, they will go in, they'll look at the pre-assessment, they will look at the different aspects, and we're going to go through all of these in detail. So one of the first area is SPURS, and SPURS is an abbreviation. It stands for Supplier Performance Risk System, and it requires all suppliers to submit a score. So the maximum score is 110. The minimum score is -203. And it's kind of calculated a little weird. You start off at 110. So if you just start your evaluation, it's 110. And then you go through and you look at the controls. And then if you have something which is not implemented across all of your environment, then you basically have to, you mark not implemented, and then it subtracts the control value, which controls have different values. They either have a value of a -5, -3, or -1, and it winds up being subtracted. This is something to be very truthful and very careful of, because this could trigger a false claim. If you were reporting all 110 and you actually don't have 110, that could be a misrepresentation, and that has gotten other organizations in trouble. So it's really important to be as accurate as you can. So from a program standpoint, it gives you a starting point. So whatever the SPURS score winds up being, okay, it's accepted, you got it, this is where it is. It makes your program measurable. It provides, hey, where are we in the particular environment? You know, we're starting off at a -203, and now we're going to build ourselves up. It provides a path. It provides a clear metric. You wind up having to report this, and it helps also your business case with internal teams and management. The folks who are on this call, I imagine you are also talking with and coordinating with your other stakeholders, could be your leaders, could be your investors. How do you provide your business case? This will actually help with that, to be able to say, okay, great, we're starting off at a -190, we're trying to improve it, these are the things that we're going to do, and getting their buy-in to do it. So from a business perspective, this winds up becoming something that you can leverage. But remember, if it's found to be inaccurate, it can be enforced by legal means. Jen, you want to take the plan of action?
Yeah, sure. So a plan of action and milestones is fondly, I should say, also known as a POAM. And that is what we are looking at as an action plan. So we personally, as a group, the 3 Comply, if you are not in the process of going directly to the government yet, and you're working on all this, you've done your calculations, we call it an action plan. And that's purposeful, because the POAM becomes something that you may need to provide to the Department of Defense. And once you do, and they get involved, you can see the red at the bottom, you're then on their timeline, not yours. So we use it as an action plan, pre-certification. It is your internal method to track what needs to be done. You may have mitigations, you may have remediation, you may have something that's brand new that you need to do, but it gives you the option of how you want to approve it, pursue it in your overall security functions. It is flexible then to your priorities, your plans, your timing. In some cases, you may have to find funding for something, and you want to do that in the next fiscal year, or you need to use up money in a calendar year. It can go both ways. So if you formalize it, or it's required that you use a POAM, it then becomes the government's involvement in it. There is maximum of 180 days. Most of them are more likely to be 90 days, where you have time to correct something. Under the new rules, you are allowed to use a POAM or have a POAM for certain items, only some of them. If you have a control that's worth 5 points, you're not going to be able to use a POAM on that. You're going to have to fix it right away. The POAM, though, the actions will allow you to use up to probably 90 days to address them. And once you're on that timeline, on their timeline, it is not yours. So we're careful about the use of POAM, but it is a key tool that you can use to make sure you can get your environment up to snuff.
Actually, just for a good comment for the chat, as the folks on the call, have you guys had to submit a SPURS, or do you guys have an action plan today? So this is the giant question when people have come up, is talk about, okay, how long does this take and how much does it take, right? What does it cost? So originally when they came out, the government came out with a number which is, it's not realistic. They said it was 5,000 and 3 months. That's not realistic. The government now is saying out there that it's 100K in 12 months, If you go to Google and you Google that, they'll say 150K in 18 months. And the reality of the consensus of the folks that are in the DIB, it's somewhere between 150 to 200K with between 18 and 20 months to put in place. So is that all at the same time? No, that's not all at the same time, but that is probably end to end, roughly around the values that they anticipate. The issue is that the documentation uplift is exactly the same no matter how big your organization is. If you are a micro business or you are a big prime, the amount of documents that need to be put together are exactly the same. So one of the second steps that we have on the road is the boundary and enclave. And specifically, this is the building the foundation for your program, is looking at control unclassified information or federal contract information, and looking at the data flow. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that is. Look at your assets and you classify the assets, and also you develop a boundary or an enclave. And there's different strategies all around these things based upon what your environment actually is. So this is just to kind of a reminder. We showed this slide yesterday, but this is just a background that the government in general, right, regardless of it's DoD or not, there's public information, right? There is non-public federal contract information, the details about, something that's being supplied or brought in back and forth. And then there is controlled unclassified information, which is a type of federal contract information. It's not public. And obviously there's a lot of rules on that. And you could take an entire, well, there's about 3 or 4 different classes you could take just on controlled unclassified information. But just from an overall standpoint for today, this is just an important concept to keep in the back of your head. So one of the things is trying to figure out how does, and we're going to talk about either CUI or FCI, flow within an organization. And this is what we have on the screen here is an example of a data flow. And sometimes there are multiple data flows because there might be different types of activities going through. This is a generalization, and your particular, how you do business might be different than what we have here. A lot of times what we call this is a lead to cash. It's called different things for different industries. But somehow you start off, you're going to have somebody that's going to go in pre-sales. And maybe as part of that RFI or RFP process, they have to look at, review information. It might be through a government portal. It might be at a site. There's lots of different entry points where somebody in sales might be exposed to controlled unclassified information. There also might be something that happens when you do a proposal, right? You need to develop a response. Then you get into, let's assume that you've won the contract, program management, trying to figure out how is that delivery going to work? What do you have to set up? How do you set up all of your internal processes? The people might need to know certain pieces of information ahead of time in order to figure out and plan for that. Then there's the delivery, right? Especially if you're in manufacturers, they need people within your organization, or you might have suppliers as well that might need information to be able to perform the work and do that. And then also within the billing, and sometimes billing systems have information beyond just federal contract information. It's possible, and we've seen it before. So there's, you might have information that might be in there. This is just a simplified view, but your process might be slightly different and might have a lot more details to it. But this is just to give you an idea that you're looking for, hey, where are the points in which this information is used? Now, there's a lot of folks who are on the call that are part of manufacturing and manufacturers. And so the process might also be a little bit more intense. And so there's things such as, you know, you're getting some design requirements, right? You're getting something, you're getting that information. It might be written in a text, it might be a design, it might be a file, it might be any kind of, you know, multiple different ways to be able to get those design requirements. Then maybe your organization, your engineering or analysis team goes in and you're putting tools and computer models in place pre-production to try to figure out, hey, how would all of this work? What would this look like? And all that kind of stuff. Then you might have some of that information might be required when you do prototypes. You might be doing 3D models. You might be doing test runs on different things to make sure, hey, can we deliver this product at the time and the quality and all that kind of stuff that you need to do it. Your production equipment might also have that resulting CUI on it in order to make that. So if the engineering team, you give a USB stick and you go out to the CNC machine, you plug it in, technically that equipment now has information on how to build that product, which came from those designs, right? So there's information there, or it might be a paper document, but in order to put in the parameters, the milling machine operator needs to put in different parameters and program that in order to be able to do things at a specific time and specific depth and all that sort of thing. And then also when you look at quality, so the quality people are trying to go in and say, hey, does the end product meet the original requirements, right? And so there's tools and there's equipment, all that kind of stuff to look at that. Those folks are also exposed to that information because they need that in order to find out, did they actually get the end result that they expected to get? So there's lots of little places in which this information could be exposed and different assets in which these things could be exposed as well. So these are just some tips. There's a lot of hidden places that could potentially have CUI. So definitely, I'd say 90% of the time it's within sales, but that whole sales process definitely has an exposure to CUI or CTI in most cases, if they do have anything at all. Definitely the manufacturing, the engineering processes, the testing, the prototypes, quality management, and also sometimes logistics, right? Based upon, it might be transportation or rigging. And rigging is interesting because rigging, what I mean by is a crane. Let's say you make something really big and you need to put something and lift it and put it into place. Well, that rigging company might need some of those details in order to figure out, hey, where do we put the cables and the hooks in order to lift that thing, to put it onto the truck or the whatever the transportation, the train car, however you're transporting it. They might need that information in order to be able to do that safely, right? So there's lots of points in which this stuff could wind up being exposed. This next topic is something that my reiteration is that this might be a great thing for a lot of the people on the call, but this is a decision not to make on your own. There is something called commercial off the shelf. And basically, if you say, let's say you make bolts, right? You supply these bolts to a car manufacturer and you supply those bolts to the Army, right? It's the same bolt. Okay, fine. It's possible that it could be considered commercial off the shelf. And this is if you have no covered defense information is handled. And it might only be considered FCI, which means you might only have to do a CMMC level 1. The contract itself may determine this, but this is something not to make the decision on your own. You definitely should, getting contract or legal help is a really good idea. We're not attorneys, and so we can't give legal advice, but this is definitely something that you would want to do in coordination with your teams and all of your advisors.
Bill,
But
I
this
want
is
to add
something that's very
something.
important.
I want to add something here.
Sure.
That's not particularly on the slide. Just keep in mind that something that will throw you into it's no longer COTS is if you have a special price. So in other words, if you sell a bulk rate in your commercial world and then you design and develop another price, a different price for, I don't know, the Army, the Navy, you know, whatever, then it's no longer considered commercial off the shelf. And that's why Bill is suggesting don't make the decision on your own. It could be a little bit trickier than you might expect in this particular area. That was it.
Yep, and very good advice. Yeah, definitely seek help for that. Okay, so one of the concepts is also about what is something called a CUI or an FCI related asset. Now, these are things that could be related to storing, processing, or transmitting CUI or FCI, or the protection of those assets. And there's some other things that are around them as well. But it could be people, it could be paper that you have printed out somewhere. It could be your technology. It could be the protection tools. In other words, the antivirus, the firewall, all those sorts of things. It could be the location itself. It could be your manufacturing facility. It could be your office. It could be both. It could be you know, your logistics hub, you know, depending upon how big you are. So there's lots of different things to be able to be places where you might wind up having CUI as and consider it an asset. And for asset classifications, and there's a lot more details within the CMMC documentation itself, but this is very general. So you might, and this is drawn in a specific way because it's like showing where the layers of protection and exposure could be. So there's assets that definitely have CUI or CTI. Let's say it might be your email system, right? You're getting files or sending files or whatever it is. There's security protective assets. So let's say again, so antivirus could be your firewalls, could be you know, other tools that you have in place to be able to protect the environment. There's something called contractor risk managed. Those are things that are not designed to handle CUI, but might. So things like that could be things that you use to do presentations, or it could be potentially your if somebody is leaving you information, it could be voice stuff. It's possible, right? So it's things that are not designed to handle CUI, but might because of the type of nature of work that you do. There's other things that they also have called specialized assets. These are things like the Internet of Things type activities, as manufacturing devices, CNC machines, milling machines, other types of milling machines, manual stuff, quality measuring equipment, and like other things like 3D printers, which a lot of people do prototypes these days using 3D printers. So those types of things might be considered specialized assets. And there was one other question that came up yesterday that we wanted to address is the question of FedRAMP. So just to kind of give a quick, this is just one page we're going to spend on this, is FedRAMP is a very special type of certification, and it's issued by the government, and a provider will have a specific product. A provider might have 30 different products, but just one product that they offer is FedRAMP. They have to go after a special security certification. It takes a very long time, and they have to make a huge investment in order to do it. And it's very rigorous. And it's for handling of any type of information that's being handled through a cloud provider, and it's specific to government information. So these are things that store, transmit, or process or protect CUI, that they're looking to make sure that those things in those environments are protecting that. There is something called an equivalency. There's very few providers have that currently. We can mention that a little bit more. And if there's ever some interest in getting that information, just let us know. We'll be happy to share that. There are products. There's different levels, but for when we're dealing with CUI, they have designated that the products must be FedRAMP moderate. There is FedRAMP low and there is FedRAMP high. Some providers call themselves, like for example, Microsoft, the moderate product, they call it GCC high, which doesn't make any sense when you're talking about FedRAMP, but it's a FedRAMP moderate product as an example. The FedRAMP marketplace lists the approved products. So just because somebody sold you something and says, oh yeah, it's FedRAMP, you need to make sure that what you actually bought is actually the thing that's on FedRAMP. And that's where the FedRAMP Marketplace, which is a website, fedramp.gov, basically that lists those approved products. There is something from a consumer of there is a shared responsibility matrix. And what that means is there are things, when you buy a FedRAMP product, there are things that they do for you and you inherit. And there are things that you have to do as an organization. And you have to set up as an organization. And if you don't do your part, then you don't actually have a FedRAMP product that you're using. So you have things which you have to do. It's not just a writing of a check. Yeah, I signed up, I'm good to go. There's things that you have to do and are responsible for. And each product will have its own individual, either customer responsibility matrix or shared responsibility matrix. Those are terms that are used very interchangeably. And those are things that you're going to be expected to do. So they do their part and you do your part. There's also one last concept. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I'm just going to go a little bit more in detail, is a boundary or an enclave. And this is where you make it look at your whole environment. And maybe you do, let's say you do 10% of your work that you do is for the government. A lot of organizations are building things which are separate enclaves. So instead of having to put all of the in-depth protections against everything that they do as a company, they are able to apply those protections to a sectioned off portion of the company, both from technological or physical. There's lots of different ways to make this cut. And the advantage to doing this is that when we're talking about when you're applying all the controls later on, when you're doing implementation, you have to apply. So there's 110 controls, there's 320 plus objectives times the number of assets. If you reduce the number of assets, you've reduced the number of footprint of maintenance and checking up on all those things over time, which makes it hopefully less expensive and less cumbersome over time. And so this concept is something that's being pushed. Sometimes this is easy to do, and sometimes this is not easy to do. And sometimes it might not make any sense to the organization because how you work. And that's okay. But some organizations are going this route as a way to be able to save money, time, resources over the long term. And just because you don't have an enclave today and go through your certification, that doesn't mean that in the future you can't set one up. Okay, Janet?
So talking about policies, procedures, and documentation. When you look at the assessment guidelines, it's very clear whether you're talking about level 1, which is for FCI, or level 2 or 3, that there's a whole way to approach. You have a review section, which is called examine, and that's when you're looking at stuff like this: policies and procedures, plans, records, whatever falls into this kind of documentation category we're talking about. And then there's an interview section, and then there's a test section. So this is crucial to understand and to know. When we look at a lot of the gaps, after we've helped people look at their SPURS scores or do a gap assessment for them, it is primarily due to the lack of policies, procedures, and other type of documentation. So this is an important concept to keep in mind. It's also the most painful part in our experience. The controls that you get out of NIST 800-171 itself describe what? They just tell you what you're supposed to do. How you're going to do it, who's going to do it, all that stuff is really up to you. So the controls are telling you what you have to do. The policies that you develop for your own company describe who, where, when for the controls. So that's your policy. Generally, policies don't change a lot, but procedures or anything you use, processes, plans, etc., those may change to reflect changes in your operating environment. So they describe how you get it done. It's very crucial that those policies, procedures match up. So if you have a policy that says, for example, we change passwords every 90 days, but your procedures tell you that you only have to change the passwords when someone changes the position or annually or something. That means they don't match up. And so that's a deficiency right out of the box. So you want to make sure procedures and policies do match up. And they tell you, the reader, they tell how you're going to implement the control. So it's really important. The second part of this is training, is those people who are actually going to be doing the work have an understanding, a thorough understanding of the procedures and how to do something, so that they're not kind of ad-libbing on their own and just going off and saying, well, it's easier to do it this way, so we're going to do it this way. That doesn't pass muster. They have to do it the way it's written down. So if somebody in the operational environment says it's not working, that's okay, as long as they go back and change the procedure and keep track of that they made a change. So now this is the new procedure, and again, do training on that. There's decent outline here because you get your the same thing, whether you're talking about NFO controls or any kind of controls. They tell you in the accompanying objectives, tell you these are the kinds of things you need to be doing. The NFO controls are an interesting concept because they are controls marked NFO in the exhibit, Appendix E to the NIST 800-171 Revision 2 document. That's where you'll find this stuff. It's required by DFARS, and they are kind of we expect you to already have all these in place, but CMMC today does not include the NFO controls. So those 61 additional controls are expected to be in place. These are a prerequisite to the rest. You will see in NIST 800-171 Revision 3 that they've kind of rethought that. People didn't really have those prerequisite things in place for the most part. It is enforced by the DoD's audit arm, which is known as DIPCAC, that you have all these controls, as well as the 110 controls from NIST 800-171. So you can see the numbers get big. That's what Bill's talking about. When they get big, they get a little overwhelming. These are documents, is a list of documents that are required by the controls. So in other words, they come from NIST 800-171. The most important one in our view is the system security plan. That tells you basically everything that you're doing, how you're doing it, where you get it from, like if you inherit controls from an external service provider. All that kind of information is in the SSP. The incident response plan is key because the DFARS rule 7012 not only requires that you follow NIST 800-171, but that you have an incident response capability. That's the wording, is capability. The best way to document that is in an incident response plan. Any kind of security control these days is looking for incident response plan, whether you're a publicly traded company, an SEC, or whatever you might be, they're looking for an incident response plan. The configuration management plan, rules of behavior, acceptable use, those are examples of things that are specific to your organization and are the types of things that make sure that what you've said you're going to do and how you're going to do it, these are the guidelines that you develop for those kind of things, and they will be looked for. There's a whole host of other things that, again, are dependent on what you do, what your company is responsible for. I mentioned training, and that is also a really key thing, because if you didn't train the people and they're not doing it correctly when somebody goes and looks, then it's really, management's fault that they didn't ensure that the training was appropriate. There's role-based training, which means based on what you do, what your individual job description is or your role description is, these are the things that you must be trained on. In general, we say everyone should be knowledgeable and have been trained on the policies. Everybody in the whole organization that's working on this data under 171. And then the role-based allows you to say, these procedures apply to this job category, or they belong to this one, but you need to do this training and you need to do that training. It may be different. The best evidence that this has been completed are the training records. I know that's a pain. You have to do them for each person. Each person has to have responsibility for their own records, but it's the only way you can actually prove that you've done the training, and the person should know. So when you're looking and you're testing in the environment and what the people are actually doing, it should match up to what the procedure says they should do, which should be in accordance with what your policies say. It goes right in a straight line. So this is a key part.
So then we go into implementation, and this is a little bit of a math, a thing where you have the policies and procedures and the plans, you apply them to the assets in the boundary. You then have the objectives that you're applying those as well. And then you wind up getting, obviously you need to put in place the process of finding and proving that you're implemented. And so at a very high level, again, you're looking to prove you've said it in your policies and procedures and your plans. You're saying for that particular environment, do you have the proof that everything is all in place?
I do want to remind everybody that the objectives are part of CMMC. They're not part of the baseline NIST 800-171, which has the 110 controls. The objectives, though, do make it a lot easier because then you know what they're really looking for when you're being assessed. That's why that's so important.
So also the other things is other consideration that overall, right, is it takes time to do. If somebody says, hey, you're going to be ready in a few days and all that kind of stuff, no, that's not true. Or even a few months, no, it takes time to do this. Evidence itself comes in many forms. We've discussed that at least a little bit in detail. There are things that once you put things in place, there's scheduled of tasks. There's things that you have to do. There's reports that have to be done on different schedules. Could be monthly, weekly, daily, whatever it happens to be. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit with there are tools like the Nectar Labs, which they have a great tool for SEAM, which is stuff having to do with managing your environment and looking at helping with the monitoring. Those things help manage because, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. And so how do you have something that will help you manage those moving parts? You want to take pre-assessment?
Yeah. So the pre-assessment piece, as we mentioned in the roadmap, this is an important part. The way more acronyms, but there's a CAP. The CAP is produced by the Cyber AV to tell all the assessors what they have to do and how to do it, because they're trying to make sure that all the assessors are going to be doing it the same way, so that, if you had an assessor that's in California, that the end result is going to turn out to be the same as someone that's in Pennsylvania, which is a hard thing to do. So one of the things that is required is looking at the pre-assessment that a company had done. And it can be an internal one or it can be an external one. Most times people recommend it be external so that you have somebody with a fresh set of eyes looking at it for you. But what the pre-assessment does is it tells you, where are we? You practice, it does the interviews, it does examine, it tests your environment so that you get a confirmation of whether it's all running in that straight line. Are you following all your written down stuff? Is it applied against all the assets that you've defined to be in your boundary, whether that's the whole company or the enclave that Bill was giving you as an idea of how to operate on a smaller scale? It is interesting because when you start getting into this, and people say, keep it small, keep it small. At first, you're like, why? Now, this is why you want to keep it as small and confined as you possibly can. I mean, even the Department of Defense is recommending keep it small, keep it where you can manage it, where it's easy to see what's going on. As I just said, the objectives are from the CMMC point of view. They come out of NIST 800-171A. So if you're looking to understand those, they come out of A, although the guidelines, if you download them from the Department of Defense, or they're on our free, I think they're referenced on our free resources, they have all the objectives as well. And all those things then give you proof of implementation. So that's why you do your pre-assessment. And it should involve managers, IT engineers, anybody that's involved in perhaps in sales that's keeping, storing CUI. And please, please, please don't forget about your service providers, because that's where you're inheriting your controls from. Through that whole assessment, you will then have been able to put together a report that tells your team where you might still have some deficiencies, and then it allows you to create your own POAM ready to go so that you can apply for certification. And there's an application process that you have to go through. And in that process, you got to be careful. It's another one when there's liability that can come from it. You do state whether or not you have things to fix or mitigate as you are in the application step. So be careful about we're perfect. If you're not, don't say that in the application. It's fine. It's perfectly okay to say that we are still fixing or mitigating things, and we're recording and following it in a POAM. So in the past, it's really been, there's been a major push from the procurement side of the DoD to be perfect. You know, the higher your score in SPURS, the more likely you are to win contracts. But in the past, and there was someone who asked it in the chat today, those project managers and those contract officers don't necessarily have the training yet about what the requirements are for CMMC. That's a promise from the Department of Defense that they will improve that. But as you can see from following what was in the chat today, they don't all have it all together yet. Do you want me to cover the certification as well, Bill?
I'll just go through this one. So the certification, like, it uses all that stuff that we were just talking about, and all the actions are almost, well, they are identical to what you went through in the pre-assessment. And the results will wind up being that you're either going to get a conditional or approved certification. You could wind up with a POAM if they found something that you need to fix. Or if it went beyond a certain point, hypothetically, you could wind up with a fail. The idea is that you have done all the work ahead of time, so you're trying to avoid that side of the fail, and you try to make sure that you're on at least the conditional or a fully approved area.
I want to comment about that for 1 sec. Can you go back, Bill? So that fail, okay. Somebody asked this as well in the chat today. What the cost? What the Department of Defense is saying it's $5,000. Well, what they're talking about is this last line that says this is what it costs, what their estimate is for what it costs to go through the certification. Marketplace would probably disagree with that estimate of $5,000, as many of you may already have known or expect. But the point being, you don't want to end up with a fail because you've already spent the money. The reason why you are getting an estimate of more like $100,000, even from the Department of Defense, is that everything above that, they're assuming you've already got that done. So I know people don't like that, but that is the assumption on the part of the Department of Defense, that that's already in place. So the point about the pre-assessment is to make sure you don't fail. You don't want to fail.
These are just put out some quick considerations. When to do it, what some of the pros and cons to do it yourself versus getting outside help. So do it yourself. So the pros that you have a short-term reduced cost, and you will be able to build some internal know-how. The cons that potentially it's going to take longer, and there's definitely a learning curve considerations. And in the process, you could miss out on opportunities if you are not at meet that time when you need to have that certification. Sometimes when you go for outside help, it could go faster. You're learning alongside folks that are exposed to this on a regular basis. You're leveraging some smart strategies that other folks have developed and be able to build those best practices. On the cons, it's definitely there's a short-term increased cost there as well.
Oh, and by the way, on the cost, the Department of Defense will allow you to put into your pricing for getting reimbursed the cost relative to the assessment done for certification. Unfortunately, not for all the other stuff, because again, they assume you've had it since December 2017, so they don't allow that. But they do allow you to add in the cost for certification and recoup it.
So we have some free resources that we have available. This is just a list, as a short list, but there's a more detailed list on the free one that we've offered, and hopefully some of you guys have gotten that. If you haven't, we will put up the QR code at the end so you can get that. The CDSE training, there is insider threat training, which is fantastic. If I had to pick one thing to do, definitely do that. They have training on CUI, DoD cyber awareness. Project Spectrum has some good beginner training and baseline education for the implementer, and they do offer some services to try to help with some baseline where do you get started off type interactions. CISA and NSA were to go through that. They offer free penetration testing. This is a big deal, by the way. This can get very expensive if you go on the outside. It is not necessarily as extensive as you would get on the outside in the commercial market, but if you're on a budget, I would definitely take advantage, especially if you're a member of the DIB. The NIST and CMMC websites, they have a lot of the documentation. Again, we have all those links that are in there as well. And CISA, as I mentioned itself, CISA is a fantastic resource. They have a whole bunch of stuff, especially related to the DIB infrastructure. You're considered part of the key infrastructure for the country. They have that free penetration testing. They have really good general guidance. They also have some great training on here as well. And each state has a representative that's been assigned in CISA. So if you fill out one of their contact forms and you send it through, you will get contact with whoever that person is for your location. This is the download for our free CMMC resources. But basically, we're just going to open it up for questions because we're at the end. Has it been, and Jen, is there any questions, or Beth, any questions in the chat which we have not addressed?
Well, actually, I was just going to turn it over to Angela to talk through what the training that is available, what it is. And so Angela's had asked if we had referenced her yet, but no, we did not. We were waiting for you. So it's over to you.
Okay. Again, good morning, everyone. Yes, there are some training pieces involved with it. And you can work with some of your training providers to customize classes or find out some information. And if it's held like a training session, not on the job training, but actually in like a classroom type setting, it may be eligible for WEDNET. Now, there are 3 levels of eligibility with WEDNET. It needs to be your company, your training, and your employees. They have really opened up the eligibility of companies, training, and employees in the last couple of years. Right now, the amount is a maximum of $2,000 per person for 1 training or 10 trainings. So it's something worth looking into. Again, that's wednetpa.com. And we are not necessarily regional. We can help companies all across the state. It is best to choose a college or university near you, because they will visit you to verify that you are a company. We don't use the sam.gov where they go through the USPS and tax code. We actually come and visit you and talk with you to determine your needs. But the program's amazing. You can use any training provider that you see fit. And like I said, any partner that works for you, but there's a lot of information online. So that can help with some of these costs associated with CMMC, especially the training piece of it. Because when you do that, there are certain documentation that you have to keep and maintain in order to get the reimbursement, which from my understanding is very much in line with what you need to have proof of documentation for this program. So it works rather nicely together.
Thanks, Angela. I have to say, when I learned about this, having been a resident and having many, several, well, this is my third small business of my own in Pennsylvania, it was thrilling to hear that this program exists. And so again, I would encourage you to look for it as well. It's something that actually Bill and I have been working with Angela so that we could figure out how to do some CMMC specific things that could be used to meet the qualifications for WedNet. So definitely take a look at that. If we could open up, and if anybody has a specific question, I think Angela, you can open it up so people can ask us a question. Otherwise, we'll go over a couple things that were in the chat. You'll also add anything to the chat, but we do have time reserved now for questions and answers.
Yeah, sure. I will answer anybody's questions that they may have with this program. It's good to work with a partner, and I'm a partner at Kutztown University. It's good to work with a partner so that you can make sure that your training, your employees, and your company are eligible. The actual application portion of it is very simple. And I could walk anyone through that, whether you choose me as a partner or not. I've been working with the WedNet grant program for the last 25 years. This is our 25th year celebration. And I've also worked with multiple colleges when I had my own business. When 2020 came around and the pandemic, everything shutting down, that's when I just started to focus more on working for Kutztown. But prior to that, I also work for the state directly on the WedNet program, on the help desk, helping partners and companies understand the process and try to make it as less complicated as possible. So compared to CMMC, this is a cakewalk.
That is a good point. It probably is really a cakewalk.
Yeah, but it's so valuable to help with that costing.
Thank you on that. And Beth, do you have anything you want to add, or?
Nope, I just wanted to say, thank you very much to both you, Jan, and Bill and Angela for, explaining what WedNet does for our area. Again, an invaluable program. I just wanted to remind everybody that now would be the time, if you have any questions, to please put them in the chat. Or again, I believe, and I said this yesterday, if we finish this up and you're like, oh man, I really wish I had asked that question, the contact information for both Bill and Jan is on the screen right now. You can also reach out to both myself and Angela via the Southeast Pennsylvania Apex Accelerator. I will put the information for our center within the chat. Again, if you have any questions, now would be the time to unmute and ask, or please feel free to utilize the chat.
Okay, well, while we wait to see if anybody has anything more, I'll cover just a couple of questions that were asked earlier in the session. Is that someone that has a question?
Yes.
Yes, go.
All right. I've been doing like a lot of training for cybersecurity, like Internet of Things. And is it okay if I sit down with somebody? So, because I realize that this is pretty meticulous, especially like all the requirements that are needed to be able to function fully and according to standard. So is there any way that I could sit down and talk to someone? Because I believe the Apex Accelerator, I was at Lehigh University. I do believe they either they stopped left. That was at Lehigh University.
Brett, I'm actually responding to you right now to your email.
Okay.
Just to let you know, there was never an Apex Accelerator at Lehigh University. They were one of our partner locations.
Okay.
The Southeast Pennsylvania Apex covers all of both Northampton and Lehigh counties, as well as the counties that surround Philadelphia. So if you're looking for assistance, I'm going to be sending you our sign up link for registration. Just follow that link when you receive it in the email, and we will get you scheduled with a counselor, see what we can do for you then.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Perfect. Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask like that, or else I'll cover off just a couple of things. Somebody had asked very early on Well, actually, Bill asked if you knew if you had the 7012 requirements in your contracts. We had someone that said yes, we had someone that said no, we had someone that said I don't know. Perfect. You got the whole spectrum covered. If you don't know, you'd be surprised. It's probably been in your contracts for a while and you didn't really realize it. But generally speaking, those are in the terms of the contract. It's probably near the end of the contract, probably overlooked by many people because it's at the end. But it's going to be in the procurement part of the requirements to a contract, and it is 7012 that you'd be looking for right now. Once CMMC is actually finalized and in place, it will have its own number. It'll be 7021. There's a couple of procurement clauses that go here. 7012, 7019, and 7020 are already all in place. They have to do with the requirement, the NIST 800-171 requirement, and then they tell you that you should be using spurs and that they have the right to come and take a look at whatever it is that you say that you're doing. So those are already all in effect, and you probably already have them in contracts. You'd just be surprised because no one's ever noticed them before. That's where they will be towards the end. And then somebody else had asked whether or not they would know. How would they know whether or not they need to do it? And it's all going to be based on whether or not you're handling FCI and CUI. And we had a back and forth on the chat that unfortunately there are still many procurement officers and project managers within the Department of Defense that really don't know a lot about it. The Department of Defense has been promising for a while, and I'm sure they are working on trying to improve the training so that their officers and managers are aware of what these requirements are. Because if they don't tell you and you put a number into spurs that's very high, you get flagged for that by the DIBCAC, and they start to ask you all these questions or they want to audit you. That could be a real bummer. So that's why attending these kind of things is very helpful. Did you want to add something, Bill?
No, I just think that those are very good insights. And there was a person earlier that asked a question about training and the project spectrum. Yep, that's a great place to definitely start. But if I was you or you were working with your company or your leadership, I would highly recommend starting with, and we have that on that free resources, and I can put that back up here in a second. There's the CDSE insider threat training. That's the one that I would start off on, because what that does is that gives your organization the why, right? So that is the biggest question. And one of the biggest barriers that we see is that we might have folks on the calls who, they might be the leadership of the organization, but they might be the person who's been entrusted to learn this stuff. And they have to, when you go and try to change a cultural thing, people are going to ask, well, why am I doing this? That training helps give you the why. And it's actually very good. And actually, it's quite scary at a certain level, but because the stuff is true, they take true stories and they translate that out into why are we doing this? And that gives some really, really solid basis. If somebody walks away from that and they don't understand why are all these protections in place, they haven't paid attention. So it's something that's, if I was going to start on that training thing, I would start there, then take all the other trainings that you want, but start there.
No, that's really good advice as well. Yeah, it is pretty scary. It's very interesting. You can't believe some of the things, but it is based on true stories, so it'll help you believe. Somebody else asked, are the time and dollars estimate applicable to pretty much everyone at every level? Yesterday we had a slide that kind of explained more about that, but the answer to that, and I did write some of it, it's too long to write it all in the chat, but I'll say now that the answer to that question is really, it depends, because it depends how much you've already done. It depends where you are in terms of, say, for example, you might have had an ISO certification already. We've had many people say, oh, I'm set. I've got SOC 2, I've got ISO 27001. The Department of Defense doesn't accept those, but they are also very handy in that if you've already done those, you have a major head start. You already got a certification, you worked on a lot of these things, but they are not acceptable. They've been determined not to be acceptable by the Department of Defense. So that time and dollar estimate really kind of, unfortunately, I hate giving an answer on it depends, but it will depend what you've already done. And if you have things in place, if you're starting from like ground zero, and there is someone that mentioned in here that they're just looking at it, studying it, your best place to begin, as we've said, because it gives you something measurable, is to look at that. What would your SPURS score be today? Just don't make any changes. Just look at what would it be if somebody came in and asked you what a SPURS score is. Even if you've never done one before, it can be done because it's based off NIST 800-171. You can figure it out, what it is. So that's why we suggest that you start and try to calculate what your SPURS score is. Somebody also has said, I have an outdated score. That's true. A lot of people have outdated scores. They are cracking down on those outdated scores, but if you've got one in there and it's not right, you should also calculate what it actually would be today. So if you've in the past just had that kind of, oh yeah, we're good, I'm sure we're at 110, and you put in that 110 score, you could be flagged. They're looking for those 110 scores in DIPCAC right now. But our recommendation about that is find out what it really is and get your action plan together so that when you put a score in, if you're asked for it right now, or you need to update it, you have the evidence that you've already done an assessment and you know what you're doing, you've got a plan, and you're attacking it. So I think that answers, I hope that answers most of the questions that were in the chat that might have been, are we really ready? Can we? I didn't get to answer everything that people had asked in completion. So hopefully, if you have anything else, you can put it into the chat, or you can also ask us publicly. Anybody else have anything? Now's your opportunity. All right, then we'll see you tomorrow, particularly if you are involved in manufacturing. Tomorrow's session will answer the questions about the Defense Production Act, which was one thing we were asked to address. It is specific to what we're doing for, or what the requirements are rather, for manufacturers. And we have a partner from Necker that will be presenting tomorrow to give you an idea of being out in the field by people who are generally manufacturers. What are we finding? What are they finding? They have hundreds of clients in the DIB right now. So they'll be able to give you, a feet on the ground type of presentation tomorrow. So encourage you to join. Tomorrow will be the last of the 3 days. And again, Bill and I thank you, Beth and Angela, for having us. And it's been a pleasure to try to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Again, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Just remember that that is a separate sign up link. If you are looking to sign up and you have not done so already, please contact me. Again, our SEPA Apex web address is in the chat. Please feel free to utilize, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow morning. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Bill. Everyone, have a great day.